Well, this has been a big week for Star Trek news. I don't know if everyone out there has heard, but we have news of when the next Star Trek series is going to actually start airing. So I'm Dan Gunther, this is Positively Trek, and with me as always is Bruce Gibson. How are you doing today, Bruce?
I'm doing great because the fact that we're getting an announcement of a new Star Trek series starting is really big news, and it's like I've been waiting forever to hear a date for Star Trek Starfleet Academy. This is so exciting. I've heard about this show off and on for decades. I'm just so thrilled.
Uh-oh.
What?
I don't know how to tell you this, Bruce. That hasn't been announced. I don't think we're supposed to tell people that. No, I'm just kidding. We have no insight onto anything like that. So.
No, I'm just making that up, of course.
We're going to end up on IO9 or something as inside sources. No, we don't have any news of a Starfleet Academy series.
But I mean, think about it. They've been talking about that at least since Star Trek V. That was supposed to be like an Academy movie at one point. And then for years, I keep hearing about something Starfleet Academy. And even like just a few years ago, they said we were going to get a Starfleet Academy series. I've heard nothing since then. I think I'll be 108 years old and they'll finally release Starfleet Academy.
And then you can just be, shaking your cane saying, I told you so. I told you. We scooped it on Positively Trek back in 2020. Yeah.
I knew it. I knew it, people.
No, but we did get a new announcement of an air date for a new Star Trek show, which is really exciting. And this is, of course, Star Trek Lower Decks, the animated series from Rick and Morty writer Mike McMahon. Not only did we get the air date, which we learned it's going to be hitting television screens on August the 6th on CBS All Access in the US, we also got a look at the starship from the series as well, which is really exciting.
It is. Although I'm excited to see the starship, but I need to see different angles because it looks a little weird, a little wonky, but this is supposed to be a little different Star Trek. This isn't like your typical Star Trek. It's supposed to be a fun animated series, so I'm not expecting the starship to look grand and beautiful. And because this one, to me, in my opinion, isn't, but it's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of in keeping with the premise where they say it's one of Starfleet's less important ships. They're involved in second contact missions. They come in after, ships like the Enterprise have done their big fancy missions. These guys kind of come in and bat cleanup, I guess. So, it's kind of fitting with that, I think.
It is. And that's why I like to see different angles. But I do like the poster art for this. And it's got a big arrow swooping up from a planet up to the saucer section to show you where the lower decks are. And it's in the back bottom part of the ship.
And this poster, it's kind of cool. It's reminiscent of those early posters for Star Trek The Motion Picture, I noticed. And I think that's really intentional. Kind of the same angle of the ship. And then the series regulars in little boxes at the bottom. And it really, if you look at it side by side with the motion picture poster that was kind of in the back of comic books back in the 70s, it looks really similar.
Oh my gosh, Dan, you just got it right. This is exactly what I was thinking. I remember as a kid in the late 70s, I was collecting comic books. I was big into Superman, so I was buying all kinds of Superman comics. And I remember the motion picture poster art in the comic books and seeing all the different cast members on the bottom and all their little boxes and that Enterprise swooping in. And I was not a big Star Trek fan at all back then, but I was like, this looks so cool. I can't wait.
Like we said, Star Trek Lower Decks is going to be coming on August the 6th on CBS All Access in the US, on CTV Sci-Fi Channel and the Crave streaming service in Canada. However, as of now, as of this recording, there's still no released plans for non-US Canada distribution. Hopefully that announcement comes soon. I trust that announcement is coming soon. We only learned about the Canadian distribution a few days ago, thanks to CTV announcing it. That wasn't even, Star Trek, the powers that be behind that announcing that. So I'm thinking we'll hear something soon regarding seeing it outside of the US and Canada.
And I'm so proud of ourselves that we know how to pronounce the ship name. I've seen so many YouTube channels and listened to so many Star Trek podcasts. They're saying the USS Cerritos or Cerritos and whatever they pronounce it, but it's Cerritos, after the town in California, which we mentioned that before in a previous episode here. And of course, it's a California-class starship, which confirms that it's named after Cerritos, California. But I'm also excited at the fact that we know that there's 10 episodes. I don't know if we knew that before. So we're getting 10 episodes.
I think this was the first confirmation of that, which is, definitely good to know. And also, we had heard this before. There is a season 2. The series has been purchased for 2 seasons, so it looks like we're definitely at least getting 2 seasons, which is exciting as well.
Yay. More Star Trek, the better.
Absolutely. Well, the other news item that I wanted to talk a bit about is an interview that showed up over on SyFyWire with the Tiptons, who are writers for IDW for their Star Trek comic series. And they talk about their new Star Trek Deep Space Nine comic, Too Long a Sacrifice, a miniseries that's going to be coming a little bit later in the summer. So this is a Deep Space Nine miniseries and the first Deep Space Nine comic published in over a decade, which is really cool. Really hoping for big things from this one. The first issue arrives on July 15th from IDW, and we're definitely going to be picking that up and taking a look and talking about it on the show as well.
Yeah, I'm excited about this because it has been over a decade since we've gotten Deep Space Nine comics, and this is a 4-issue miniseries, so we get 4 nice issues. And if you don't want to read each issue as they come out, I'm sure it'll come out in a trade paperback, which would be fantastic. They interviewed David Tipton, and he says there's 2 points of particular interest with this series. One, a closer look at the behind-the-scenes aspect of Deep Space Nine, the ongoing underground trade and business that stays in the shadows, along with the station's darker history dating back to the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. And he says the second thing is a look at how the station would handle a series of seemingly unstoppable crimes. So it's like a crime thriller with Odo.
Yeah, and I mean, this character is one that fits really well with that kind of noir feel I feel like they're going for with this comic. So, I'm really excited about this. And reading this interview, these guys know their Star Trek, and that jumps out to me as I'm reading this because of some of the stuff they say. So definitely check out that article. It's really worth taking a read.
And we have a guest on today's show that really knows his Star Trek too.
Indeed. Yeah, so joining us for the main part of the show is Dr. Brian Goldman. He's a radio host, an ER doctor, and a medical pundit here in Canada. I really think he has some really interesting things to say about the world we're living in right now, and of course about Star Trek, as it turns out he's a big Star Trek fan. So, Dr. Brian Goldman, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you on the show. Now, you have quite an impressive resume here. So just to hit some of the highlights, you're an ER doctor at Mount Sinai Hospital in Toronto. You're a radio host of a popular show on CBC, White Coat Black Art. You're a healthcare pundit, an author, and also relevant to this podcast, a Star Trek fan.
And yet you still had time to put us into your schedule.
Let's turn that one around. You would have been first on my list of things to do because I have never been asked to be on a program, on a podcast that focuses on Star Trek. I listen to Star Trek podcasts. Inglorious Treksperts is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, and I've watched all the shows. I've loved some. Haven't necessarily loved some of the others, but I always give it a good, fair watching, and so this is actually a treat to be able to do this.
Excellent. Well, like I said, it's an honor to have you, and this all started. I should give a bit of background. I was listening to a radio show here in Canada, Tapestry, with Mary Hines, and you were the subject of an interview. And it came up, your Star Trek fandom, when she was asking about what your song to help you get through this pandemic is. And you had a really great answer and one that just like set off all my alarm bells for, oh my goodness, a true Star Trek fan who really knows his stuff here. So why don't you talk a little bit about what that song is and how that helps you get through the current situation we're in?
So the song is Blue Skies. Blue Skies, people who have watched Star Trek Picard know that Blue Skies was very much the framing device for the entire 10 show arc. The orchestrated version, sung by Isa Briones, as the life force, the computerized life force of Commander Data, ebbed away. To me, that was the emotional center of the entire series. So when I heard that song, first of all, it was beautiful. For people who haven't watched Star Trek Picard, and I'm assuming that this audience has, in the Star Trek Picard series, it was true to canon, and in Star Trek Nemesis, Data had sacrificed himself so that Picard could live. He sang. Brent Spiner can sing. He can sing a little. He can dance a little. I think he had an album. Was it Old Yellow Eyes is Back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a deep cut. Absolutely.
And, frankly, I didn't care to hear him singing Blue Skies in the movie, in Star Trek Nemesis. It was, that movie, for many, many reasons that we can get into, was a kind of a sad ending to the franchise, that and the end of Enterprise, which I think that happened shortly afterwards. There was a sense that the Star Trek characters weren't going to come back anytime soon, which turned out to happily be wrong. Data, he sang Blue Skies as a wedding present to Riker and Troy, who were finally getting married. Like, they had to be the oldest married couple you could imagine. Like, after so many years as Imzadis, they finally got married, and he sang this as a wedding gift to them, and he sang it as a ditty, and most versions of this 100-year-old song, nearly 100-year-old song, I guess about 93-year-old song by Irving Berlin, are played and sung as an up-tempo kind of a dance number. Isa Briones' version was sad and ironic and heartfelt. And what's really interesting is that if you start going on YouTube, there are many versions of it. Willie Nelson has a very famous version of Blue Skies. There's more contemporary versions. There's older versions. If you go back to Irving Berlin himself playing it, he played it as a slow tempo, sad song. And what's interesting about that is that the song, he wrote the song, I think, in 1926, and the version I heard was played was recorded in 1927, and it was on the cusp of the Depression, but there was no Depression at that time. It was almost as if he was capturing a sense that American society was at the precipice of a great economic collapse, of a cataclysm, and then the war would follow after that, but they didn't know it. So the version of Blue Skies that Isa Briones sang, and it was sung to the death of Data. Maybe, Data was the most innocent character in Star Trek, so maybe it's the death of innocence. And I'm not sure that Michael Chabon, was thinking about all of this. Sometimes people have these ideas percolating that get manifested, like unconscious ideas that get manifested as the music that you hear, the mood that's created. But it was there. The reason why this song took special significance to me, or brought special significance to me during the pandemic, is that we see the unraveling of society. That precipice that perhaps Irving Berlin could detect nearly 100 years ago in the Depression and the war that was going to follow, maybe the cusp of the First World War, the Great War, that we're in exactly that kind of moment in which society is being taxed, stressed to its very limits by an awful pandemic. And in the United States, now it's worse than ever. Over 50,000 people are being infected, or are being recorded as infected every day. And that means, as the numbers go up, it may be 100,000 eventually. That means lots of people are going to die. People have lost their jobs. People have lost their sense of purpose. Young people, especially, I have a 22-year-old who just graduated from university. I've got an 18-year-old son who just graduated from high school, and I really worry about young people the most, that their lives are being altered forever. And in the middle of all this, we have Black Lives Matter, and we have the death of the murder of George Floyd, and others. And you get the sense of society unraveling. And there's this song that kind of captures that mood perfectly. And, I don't know about you, but I have two go-tos to help me cope with the stress of the pandemic. And one of them is a run. I ran this morning. I ran 15 kilometers this morning. And I can tell you, I only feel right after a long run. At every other time, as I'm in the glow of that right now, it's a perfect time to be speaking. But at other times, the stress just builds up and it eats me up and eats me until I go back to running. And then the other thing that's solace is music. Some people have to have a cheery song. They can only work out to Taylor Swift. They need something that kind of really makes them feel better. But for me, I actually like sad songs that kind of make me bring that difficult emotions that I have out to the surface. That was the significance of it for me. And Mary Hines asked, what songs are getting you through the pandemic? It was either that or Starman, which I gather I've been told is the astronaut's favorite song, and it's a fabulous song. You can't be sad. You cannot be sad listening to Starman.
Well, of course, this pandemic that we're going through, you're in a very particular position with regards to that, of course, as an ER doctor and as a healthcare expert. What does being in that role of an ER doctor, what does that look like right now in the age of COVID with all of this happening? Well,
and that's a great question, and it's changing. It changes weekly. I can tell you, that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of pent-up anticipation that we're about to get inundated with sick patients with COVID, and we're going to be, and we're waiting for this storm of patients, one after another, 5 patients on a ventilator in the emergency department waiting to be admitted to the intensive care unit. And we drilled for that. We did, they're called PCBs, protected code blues, where you're supposed to wear this very special, elaborate getup of gowns and 2 sets of gloves and a mask and a face shield and a head covering and shoe coverings. I had younger colleagues, because I'm 64, I had younger colleagues who said, Brian, when you're on, I'm going to go in and do the intubations because I don't want you to die. Can you believe that? And I was blown away when they did that. And we prepared for this very different world. And we started working in the emergency department, and to this day, I'm in and out of gowns constantly. I'm wearing a mask constantly, because the symptoms of code blue are so myriad and varied, and people can be asymptomatic. It's not hard to fail the initial screening for COVID, where you end up saying, this person could have COVID, I have to get into the get-up. Gown, masks, gloves, etc., and I'm swabbing people left, right, and center. What I can tell you, so that's the reality. The reality is the gowning and the gloving and having to think about COVID all the time. Did I remember to is there a stethoscope in this room, because I can't bring my own stethoscope into the examining room because it's going to get contaminated. So the new normal has changed all of those procedures. But very important, but the cataclysm has not come to most of the emergency departments that I know in Canada. It didn't come. There are some places in the outer reaches of Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, places like Brampton and Scarborough, and Vaughan, where they had a greater number of patients, and their intensive care units were full with COVID patients. But we didn't see it. In fact, if anything, our volumes went way down. The number of patients we saw went way down. Where ordinarily I would see 18 to 20 patients a shift, sometimes 22, 23. And, during COVID, there were a few shifts where I saw 6 patients during an 8-hour shift, and we were going home early. And businesses started to pick up. More people are coming back to the hospital. But when you talk to patients about why didn't they come sooner? Because a lot of people came later. If they had appendicitis, now they came in with a burst appendix and all the complications of a burst appendicitis. You'd ask them, why didn't you come in sooner? They didn't want to bother us. They didn't think that what they had was warranted an emergency visit, or they didn't want to get COVID in the hospital, which doesn't happen. Or they were afraid that if they were admitted to hospital, they'd never see their loved ones again because we restricted visitors. That's what being an emergency physician has looked like. We're still social. I mean, I have to say I'm grateful as an emergency physician I had a place to go to work. How many people don't? How many people have been at home the entire time? And I love that I can work from home and I can still function as a radio host. But to me, there were times when just having that social contact with my colleagues and, the nurses in the emergency department also kept me going and made me feel a lot less alone.
So going back to your life as a Star Trek fan, I guess, is that something that you have found informs your life and career as a physician? Is that something that you kind of bring into your day-to-day life as a doctor?
Yeah, because I was thinking, as you were talking about work in the ER, I thought, does he sometimes think about being McCoy or Crusher or Bashir?
Yeah, you know what? That's a good question. So who's my doctor? So I think McCoy is my doctor. I mean, I'm old enough for I remember when my best friend, when I was, I guess 10 years old, my best friend said you should check out this brand new series, and he said this is the first science fiction television series for adults. That's how he billed it to me. And I remember back when the networks would have their previews where they would just give you a flash of images and scenes. And they were obviously, thinking back, they were obviously scenes from Where No Man Has Gone Before, from the pilot, from the second pilot. So I started watching it from the very beginning. He was the emotional center of the show. He was grounded, he was ethical, but he was practical. I've never found myself saying, damn it, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer. But, he's a guy who knows his limits as a character, as a physician. And I think that I don't think it's a bad place to be, as a physician. I think a lot of physicians don't understand that they're not supposed to be computers, that they're perfectionistic, and they're terrified of making a mistake. I mean, nobody wants to make a mistake, but to be human is to make a mistake. And so he was the one who was reminding us constantly of what it means to be human. Or maybe it's just that I'm a TOS guy because, damn it, that's the first show I watched. And there are people who only started tuning in to the third season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And so that's their series and that's their moment. And surprisingly, there are others whose first Star Trek was Voyager, and that's their show. So I have to say, of all the other doctors, I loved Robert Picardo's portrayal. The doctor who never had a name, his annoyance, his ability to be angry, irritated in the moment. I think how many physicians haven't been irritated by patients who have trivial complaints? And so, I guess for an emergency physician, having somebody like that, he reminds me of colleagues that I know, crusty colleagues that I know. I never believed in Beverly Crusher. She just didn't have, she spoke the tech talk, but she just didn't have that attitude of a doctor. I think if anything, I mean, even though they lamented her year on The Next Generation, Diana Muldaur as Pulaski. I think Pulaski I think she was probably channeling McCoy. The fact that she was older and experienced, and I think, I liked her performance better.
I'm catching a theme here. Grumpy. The doctors that are grumpy are more realistic.
Yeah. I think it's fair because I think, hey, listen, you maybe you haven't spent a lot of time in the doctor's lounge, but doctors are grumpy. Doctors are grumpy because they don't think they get enough the respect they used to get. They don't get as well paid as they used to. They have to work piecemeal. The public doesn't understand that when their salaries are published, that they don't include the expenses that they have to pay. And, doctors' expenses could be 30, 35, 40, even 50%. Ophthalmologists, for instance, well, they make a fortune, but that's their gross fees. They have to maintain, they have to purchase and maintain and equip and staff to a much greater degree than a family doctor has to. And all of that costs a lot of money. Lately during COVID, a lot of them just stopped earning money. And yes, they do virtual visits, and the provinces suddenly paid, allowed, fee codes to be paid for virtual visits. And then in Ontario, for instance, there was a computer glitch and they didn't get paid until June. So for 3 months, they didn't get paid a nickel, and they were still having to pay, office rent And some people, the public would be surprised to learn that some physicians, it's not a license to print money for some physicians. Some of them are 2 steps away from bankruptcy, from personal bankruptcy. And so, yeah, of course they're grumpy. And they also feel as if they've got too many rules and regulations. There's too much micromanagement. There's too much outsiders telling them how to do their business. I wrote a book called The Secret Language of Doctors, and not a terribly popular book, but it did unpack the culture of modern medicine, as evidenced by the slang that's used to describe situations. And that's the problem. That's why some people don't like the book, because they don't like the slang. And my answer to that is, if you can't stand the truth, then how are you ever going to learn and grow from it?
Well, at least our Star Trek doctors don't have to deal with money, since there's no money in the future for the most part. But there's rules and regulations.
Yeah, and you know what? There's no money in modern medicine either, apparently. That's what a lot of my colleagues say.
Now, earlier, before I asked you a question, you started to say something about Bashir, and I'm going to predict that you're going to say something about Bashir you like, but he's not as grumpy, though.
No, he's not. Although he has an irascible side. But that's only because he had this inner life, and the writers were clearly desperate to figure out what that inner life was until they, and then they made him genetically perfect and handed him over to Section 31, and that gave him that layer that I guess you could look back to the original episodes of Deep Space Nine and say, oh, so that's what was on his mind. I think of all the characters on Deep Space Nine, he was one that was not as well developed or well drawn, well drafted at the beginning. And they had to kind of, fortunately, because they had this serialized, they figured out that they were going to do this serialized take with these long form stories like the Dominion War, that they had room to grow and develop his personality. That was an interesting show, because I think many of the characters had to have an arc in order to become fully layered and actualized. Like Benjamin Sisko, the Benjamin Sisko at the beginning was not anywhere near the Benjamin Sisko at the end. He had changed so much. We had learned so much about him. And we'd learned so much about Odo and all of the other characters, that they underwent tremendous transformation, probably more than any of the other characters in any of the other Star Trek series.
You were talking earlier about the music you listen to in order to cope. Is there anything that you tune to in Star Trek? Is there an episode or just a particular series that you go to when you're coping? Because, in an ER, even before COVID, that's a lot of stress in itself. And now you're adding COVID and everything that's going on in the world right now.
So you're talking about the music of Star Trek?
I'm talking about music, or just even an episode.
Oh, yeah, well, but the thing is that I love music, and I gravitate towards music. And in fact, I don't think enough credit is given to the composers of the who created the music and the soundscape of TOS. Alexander Courage and Fred Steiner and Gerald Fried. I can tell you that the day Leonard Nimoy died, I went back and I watched This Side of Paradise, and the scene in which Layla, that's her name, Jill Ireland?
Layla Kalomi, yeah.
Has beamed up, and he's got to tell her that he's no longer with the spores.
Right.
It's the speech where he says, I am what I am. And if there are self-made purgatories, I'm even getting verklempt just thinking about it. If there are self-made purgatories, mine can be no worse than others. He talks about his loyalty to the man on the bridge, which takes us in a whole different direction in terms of fan fiction, which is really interesting. But don't forget the music that Gerald Fried, he's still alive, and he's played that music at concerts. He did one quite recently. He would be over 90 right now, and there aren't that many people who still have their faculties who worked during the old series. Without that music, that music perfectly fit the scene. It perfectly supported it. It was symbiotic with Leonard Nimoy's performance, and it's tragic. You know, it is in its own way as tragic as Kirk stopping McCoy from saving Edith Keeler, because what he's saying is that there's a part of him that will never be able to love, that will never be able to give himself fully over to another person, to a significant other, and that's tragic. And you could feel the tragedy in that moment. So yeah, no, you know, in fact, the music is like most music for TV shows is wallpaper. There's nothing wallpaper about any of this. You know, there's no, and you know, like you've got to go back to the first 10 episodes of the old series because the music that's created was written, these episodes were scored. So the first time you see the Fesarius, you know, in the Corbomite maneuver, it's mighty, even though the special effects are crap. The music tells you this is a mighty ship that they're seeing, and they're hopelessly outmatched. And you know, the you know, people always refer to the first encounter with the Romulans, and in fact that was reused in Star Trek Picard. They kept going back to it again and again. Every time they showed the Romulan ship, the Borg cube, they played the Romulan, the old Romulan theme. I mean, if you can remember a score, then it must be really good. And I can tell you, I listen to music scores all the time. One of my favorite scores is Batman Begins. Back to Star Trek, James Horner's Wrath of Khan is the best score. It's the best score of the movies. You know, I know people think that Star Trek the Motion Picture was a better score, but no, I think James Horner's was the best.
Yeah, I love that one. Similar to this, we recently did a just kind of look back review at the episode The Doomsday Machine on YouTube. And like about a quarter of the time we talked about it, we were talking about the score from that because it's so iconic. And that's another one that was scored for that episode and then reused a bunch afterwards.
And it was, although it's interesting when they scored it for an episode, you know, there are bits that don't get reused.
Mm-hmm.
There was a particular, like, it's nautical. It sounds nautical, like, because it sounds like it's meant to be, you know, it's Captain Ahab.
Exactly, yeah.
And of course, Amok Time. They reused some of that, but it was also, you know, it was scored especially for that episode and quite memorable.
Yeah, people always say, "Oh, the Star Trek fight music," and I always in my mind I have to say, it's not the Star Trek fight music, it's the Kirk fighting Spock music. Like, that's what that was. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on is just, you know, for our listeners, for people who are listening, going through what's happening right now. You talked about the number of new cases happening in the US right now. There are a lot of different voices telling people a lot of different things. Politicians. What is your advice for how we should be staying as safe as possible, and who should we be listening to? Whose voices should we be paying attention to at this time? Kind of maybe a big question.
No, yeah, but there, you know, it's not like there's nothing there that I haven't said before that I don't tweet frequently. You know, certainly we should be doing the 3 W's, and one of them is washing your hands. And that means, you know, getting used to, you know, the idea of washing your hands frequently. And, you know, it's some people just need to be told what to do, and other people need to be given the sense of why, you know, why do you want to wash your hands frequently? Because here's the story of how you get COVID. Either someone coughs on you or sneezes on you, so that you want to wash your hands, wear a mask. That's the second W. And the third W is, you know, it's about staying away from people, and I can't tell you what the W is right now, but basically it's maintaining physical distance from other people. And all of that makes perfect sense because you're going to get COVID-19 the closer you are to people for the longest period of time. And maybe the third one's being wary of large crowds. I think that's what it is. So you avoid large crowds because the more people you're in close physical contact with inside of 2 meters, the greater your chances of getting the infection from somebody who doesn't know they're infected. That's first of all. You wear a mask in situations in which you either could be infected and you don't want to infect other people, or you want an extra level of protection when you're not certain that you can avoid people, you know, by 2 meters or more. if you don't think you can practice physical distancing. So for instance, you go into a store to buy something, you go in to buy a takeout coffee. I would always wear a mask in that kind of environment. I would never not wear a mask. In fact, the only times I don't wear a mask would be if I'm walking with my partner Tamara in the neighborhood and I can practice physical distancing from other people by, if somebody's coming, we're on the sidewalk, they're coming towards me, we step out onto the road so that we avoid, getting into close proximity. The washing hands thing is important because and all of that is around your personal habits. You wash your hands. Basically, it works like this. Somebody who has COVID-19 coughs on their hands and touches a surface, or sneezes on a surface or coughs on a surface. You're going to get COVID if that glistening surface, if you touch that glistening surface and then touch your eyes, nose, or mouth. So anything that you do in that process to break that cycle up will stop you from getting infected. So wipe the surface down. Now it's disinfected. You can touch it all you like, and you're not going to get infected. If you forgot to wipe down the surface, or you didn't know that it hadn't been wiped down at that point, if after you've touched the surface, if you wash your hands, again, you're not going to get infected. And if all else fails, you have the surface wasn't wiped down, you didn't touch, you touched, you didn't wash your hands, don't touch your face. If you don't touch your face, again, you're not going to infect yourself. Okay? So all of these things actually make a lot of sense, and that's what you should do. What authorities should do, they should test frequently. They should be testing people in cases of outbreaks. They should be testing anybody who thinks they might have been exposed, healthcare professionals or lay people. They should be tracing contacts. So if there's a positive result, they should have a SWAT team that's able to make the phone calls in real time and figure out who you might have gotten it from and who you have been in contact with, so that they can warn those people to get tested and to isolate themselves. And then the third thing is trust. That means that they should be delivering messages that are clear and consistent, and when they make a mistake, they should just admit they're wrong and move on. Those are all of my words of advice. The other thing is, in the United States, they have politicized scientific advice from public health officials. Who do I listen to? Yeah, you asked me that. I listen to public health officials, and in particular, Dr. Bonnie Henry from British Columbia, who not single-handedly, but certainly she's been clear. She's been concise. She's been empathic, and she'd make a great chief public health officer for Canada. Not that Theresa Tam's been all that bad. Mm-hmm. I think we've had muddier messages in some other parts of Canada, particularly Ontario, and this is important to establish trust in public health officials, because the more trustworthy they are, and that doesn't mean they always get it right, but it does mean that they pivot when they need to, and that they present the evidence that informs the decisions that they're making and the recommendations that they're making. So the 3 T's for authorities are test, trace, and trust.
So one other thing that I wanted to touch on briefly is, the mental aspect of this. We all need things to look forward that will help ease the anxiety and fear that we're all feeling right now. And there's some interesting stuff coming in the world of Star Trek. And I was wondering if there's anything in particular you're most looking forward to right now from Star Trek.
Yeah, there certainly is. I would say that my partner Tamara and I have been watching Star Trek Discovery from the beginning, and I think there are hardcore fans who have not been pleased with Discovery. They felt that it played too much with canon, and that it was the problem that it was set like 10 years before the events of the old series. On the other hand, now Discovery is 1,000 years in the future or 900 years in the future. They get to make their own canon. And so I think that's fantastic. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they come up with. I have to say that I am so glad that Anson Mount is going to be the star of a new series. I guess they're calling it Star Trek Strange New Worlds right now, because I just think it's lovely. He inhabited the character of Pike and made him into a captain you'd want to serve under. And he may be the best captain that has ever put a Starfleet uniform on for television purposes. And I think in many respects he's the best combination of Kirk and Picard. He's got intellect, he's got heart, he's grounded ethically, He gets angry, but he knows how to motivate his crew. And now he's living with the certain knowledge of his death, of his final years. And if anything, that's made him a more interesting character. I have to say that Ethan Peck nailed it, completely nailed young Spock. And in a way that Zachary Quinto looks like him, but Ethan Peck did him. And is Spock. And I believe it. So I can't wait to see what that series is going to be like. This opens up a completely different can of worms. I'm not a fan of the Kelvin universe, and I don't know if it's the Kelvin universe or just the choices that they've made. And that's the stuff of a completely different podcast. Creating this world or this universe in which nothing that happened in the old series is the canon's been thrown out, and then immediately telling a story about Khan as their second movie, Into Darkness, was just a dumb move. And when they could have done anything. The whole idea was to create a world where they did anything. I was really hoping that we would have a Quentin Tarantino version of Star Trek. Yeah? Didn't you?
I'd love to see what all kinds of different people would bring to Star Trek. People get scared when they think outside the box, but I'm like, oh, bring it on.
and like if you follow Tarantino's films, he has a way of recycling 60s and 70s TV stars, and I have no doubt. I don't have any inside knowledge, but I have no doubt that he had a big place for William Shatner, that he was going to have a big part for him, and I would have loved to have seen it. I want him to be the captain one more time.
I mean, it's science fiction. I mean, we can get Kirk back in some manner, right?
Yeah.
It's got to happen.
Yeah, the idea that you can't do it, that they couldn't put him into the real reason why they didn't put him in was, I'm sure that his price was too high, and he would have asked for rewrites that would have beefed up his part, and that's the reason why he said he's not interested in doing cameos. Okay.
Well, of course, you are the host of White Coat Black Art on CBC Radio here in Canada. Recently just wrapped its most recent season. And you're also the host of a podcast called The Dose through CBC Podcasts as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about those shows and what our listeners can expect if they tune in.
So White Coat Black Art basically is a show that is all about the experience of patients in modern medicine, in the culture of modern medicine. We pull no punches. We talk about controversial subjects. We were one of the first shows to talk about what it's like if you're a health professional who has experienced racism in medicine or from patients. We talked about racist. We did a show about racist patients. We did it like 5 years ago. We've done more than our share of shows on Me Too in medicine, but we also do shows like we told the story of a man who is over 50. His name is Jay DeMaz. He has end-stage Lou Gehrig's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and what happens when his care team doesn't set up his iPad. His iPad has an eye scanner so that his keyboard is activated by his eye movements. And if they don't line it up perfectly, or if they take it away from him because they just haven't bothered to learn how to use it, he becomes incommunicado. And he's an articulate guy. And so when he gets communicado again, when they reestablish it, he's got a mouthful. He's got a lot of things to say. And so we want to be able to represent people like that. That's what you get on White Coat Black Art. Not surprisingly, we did a lot of shows on COVID. The most memorable shows, what it's like to be a homeless person in the time of COVID. And, when you're being thrown into the breach and you're being put at risk all the time. Or what it's like to be a senior in a long-term care facility and you haven't seen your loved ones for 3 months and you haven't been allowed to, other than a wave, and like a drive-by. So that's White Coat Black Art. The Dose, what was missing from White Coat Black Art was practical information that you can use to make better decisions about your health. And that's what we provide on The Dose. We answer a burning question every week. For instance, should I care what my BMI is? And your body mass index, because for a long time that became synonymous with your health. It tells you whether you're overweight or obese, and does that mean that you're going to die of a stroke or a heart attack because you have a high BMI? And so we unpacked it and we demystified that. Not surprisingly, when COVID came in force. Most of the questions that we got from listeners was, can you do a podcast on, for instance, tell us about contact tracing, or tell us about how close are we to a vaccine and me getting my life back to normal. Probably our most popular show was the vaccine show, and in fact, we're rerunning it this weekend. All summer long in the White Coat Black Art time slot, we're playing new and old episodes of The Dose and recent episodes of The Dose, so that we can get people who only listen on the radio to get interested in subscribing to the podcast. We did our show recently, a show on The Dose about the vaccine and the resurgence of the anti-vaccination movement in preparation for, in anticipation of the COVID vaccine. 30% of Americans have said they won't roll up their sleeves to get the vaccine when it becomes available, which is insane.
That drives me crazy.
And so we tried to talk about why. We talked about Russian bot farms, fake Twitter accounts that are spewing out this crap about vaccines, and about how you want to have a strong herd, so you need to have herd immunity, so everybody needs to get it, and so that the weak will die. I mean, it's just insane. And then the other one is I want to find a new partner in the time of COVID. So we have a show all about that, about what you need to do. And I won't give them any more of it. It's called The Dose. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can subscribe to it, or you can subscribe to it at CBC Podcasts. And we want people to listen. We want people to rate it highly so that other people will find out about it.
Excellent. And just one last thing. The other thing I want to add this to my reading list. Your most recent book from 2018, The Power of Kindness. And I'm just thinking back to you talking about Star Trek doctors. And that's one thing. All the Star Trek doctors are incredibly empathetic, maybe except the EMH at first. But, for the most part, they're very caring, very empathetic people. And I like this kind of take on the medical industry and looking at it from that perspective.
Yeah, well, and it's very interesting because when I pitched the book that became The Power of Kindness, it was supposed to be a book about empathy in healthcare, in the hospital, in the clinics. And the publisher wisely said, that's too narrow. We want you to go out into the world instead and talk about the power of kindness, learn from people. Instead of going to the clinic, go to the bus station or the bar. I did a chapter called, The Bar at Ground Zero. So this is O'Hara's, which is the only bar inside Ground Zero for the World Trade Center attacks, and it's steps from what was the World Trade Center. And I met the kindest bartenders in the world, and this was a bar that was closed for 6 months in the wake of 9/11, and they reopened. They could have closed for good. It used to be a bar that serviced the financial community. And then it became a meeting place for first responders, because right across the street was Engine 11 Ladder 10, and a lot of the firefighters from that unit were dispatched to the World Trade Center and lost their lives when the Twin Towers collapsed. There's a lot of survivor guilt among the ones that survived. And they have, if you go to this bar, if you ever travel to New York City, go to O'Hara's, and you'll see they've got approaching 10,000 crests of first responders from New York, from across the United States, Canada. There's lots of Canadian ones, and around the world. And you see that what they've done is it's a shrine to first responders. It's a meeting place where people who are traumatized by their work can come and talk to their brothers and sisters. I wanted to find out the mission behind that bar, why they changed their mission, and I met the kindest bartenders on the planet. Kinds of people who save marriages and know when to cut somebody off and when instead to give them another drink but drive them home. And they're very empathetic. The neat thing is that I rediscovered my own empathy, which the kind of the journey of the book. I begin by recounting a story in which I was accused by a family of being unkind. It happens. And when they accuse you of incompetence, there's a good chance they don't know what they're talking about. There are many gray areas. There's decisions you make that somebody else might have made a different decision, but you can argue it. But when they tell you were unkind, they got you busted. And that set me on the journey to write the book. And, I had my brain scanned. I had an MRI to see if I had the kindness centers of my brain, if they lit up. I had a personality test, and I ventured around the world. I went to Japan to meet the roboticists who are building kind and empathic robots and companions, because companion robots are going to be a big thing in the years to come. And I went to Brazil. I met a woman who, a woman in her early 30s who befriended a man who'd been homeless on the streets of Sao Paulo for 37 years. And she calls this man her soulmate. And I wanted to know what kind of a person actually adopts a homeless person, and I learned her story, and I have many, many stories like that in The Power of Kindness. And I think that it's a very appropriate book in the time of COVID.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, I'm only going to go see a doctor that I feel like I'm getting some kindness from. It's like I want to feel like a real person, and not just a statistic or just a number that comes in. And I always look for kindness in anybody I relate to. And of course, we're getting kindness from you, and that's why we have you on the show.
Aw, and you were kind to invite me, and you seem like very kind guys too. Yeah, you're good listeners.
Oh, thank you. Well, if people wanted to follow you online, where would they best be able to do that?
So I have a website, drbriangoldman.com, and the doctor is spelled DOCTOR, Brian, BRIAN, Goldman, all one word, .com. My Twitter handle is @NightShiftMD, and I post a lot of stuff there, my own thoughts, and of course stuff that I retweet, and CBC, my affiliation with CBC, you can find us on cbc.ca/whitecoat, where you can find great articles about our shows, the shows themselves, both Whitecoat, Black Art, and The Dose.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really enlightening and great discussion. And I love finding Star Trek fans in all walks of life. And to discover that you are such a big Star Trek fan was really special to me. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And you know what? That's because we're everywhere. Star Trek fans are everywhere.
Well, you can find the show on Twitter. We're @PositivelyTrek. You can find me on Twitter @Kertrats. That's KERTRATS. And of course, we have our Facebook group. Just search Positively Trek on Facebook, and we'll let you right into that group. And Bruce?
And you can find me on Twitter @Admiral_Rex. That's Admiral with the underline, then Rex. And you can find me doing some episodes recently of the Star Wars Report. And you can also find me wearing a mask when I'm out in public.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Dr. Brian Goldman, for joining us. And thank you all for listening. And we'll see you again next week.